I reckon it was the smell that set me off this morning, a faint tangle of motor oil and overripe bananas driftin' in through the kitchen screen. Same way it did the day Harold first slid his greasy coveralls across my freshly mopped linoleum and said, "Lou, you gotta taste this new banana nut loaf the preacher's wife made." That scent, sweet and metal sharp, nudged open a dusty drawer in my head, and out tumbled the memory that's kept my heart knockin' like a loose shutter ever since Daniel and that pretty talkin' Tina darkened my front door. I'm Lou Louise May Carter if we're being formal, but nobody's tangled with that mouthful since Nixon waved goodbye on the helicopter. I'm 78, lived every sunup within earshot of the Benton church bell, taught Sunday school in that saggin' brick annex till my hips started creakin' louder than the floorboards. Been a widow since '99, raised my boy with coupon clip-in and Walmart pay stubs, stitched prom dresses at the kitchen table till my knuckles ached, and I'd have sworn I knew the shape of loyalty better than the lines on my own palms. Till the day my only child walked me straight into a lawyer's office disguised as a bank errand. Oh, and sugar, if this old yarn settles warm in your bones so far, be a dear and tap that thumbs up and jot me a note down yonder. I do love seein' proof there's still kind ears on the far side of this little glass screen. Anyhow, that whiff of bananas brought back Tina's first visit, her voice all sunshine, a skin whether I liked extra cinnamon in my bread. Funny how one friendly slice can mask a cage door clickin' shut. I keep seeing Daniel's eyes that day cloudy, like when a storm's waitin' just beyond the tree line, and hearin' him say, "Ma, sign here, it's just to streamline your bills." Streamline my foot. Now, some nights, the wind rattles my porch swing, and I swear it sounds like hospital gurneys rollin' me away from every quilt I ever hand-pieced. Other times, it's softer, the hum of Tina's car idlin' while she waited for Daniel to fetch another box of my papers, as if my whole life could be folded and labeled like winter clothes. So why drudge it up now? Because hushin' it down hasn't given me a lick of sleep, and somewhere out there another gray-haired gal may be starin' at a stranger in her own kin's smile. The good Lord handed me breath this mornin', and I aim to spend it warnin', not weepin'. Stick around, and I'll lay the cards face up. How a ladder tumble. One slick signature and a sweet smell from the oven nearly cost me every dime and the sliver of freedom I've got left. You ever felt a memory tighten around your ribs like that, holding you downright captive till you speak it out loud? Well, pour yourself something warm, settle back, and let an old girl tell you about the day love turned into ledger lines, and how a little grit, a late-night phone call, and the holiest gossip chain in Benton pried those bars wide open. Now, shall we begin? Funny thing about memory, sugar. It tiptoes back when you think yesterday's finished its chores, and before you know it, you're setting the table for ghosts. I was a barefoot slip of a girl when Benton counted 2 groceries, 1 stoplight, and dirt roads that turned to syrupy mud each summer storm. Daddy kept the Texaco humming by the highway, whistling hymns between customers, and Mama stitched aprons while the house smelled of lye soap. We lived in a clapboard cottage with a porch wide enough for 3 rockers and 1 hound. Evenings I'd perch there, legs swinging, pretending the fireflies were city lights in far-off places the radio promised. My dreams were simple: a store-bought dress that didn't itch, a bus ride to Little Rock, popcorn at a Saturday matinee. I believed that kindness never lost its shine and that folks, even the ornery ones, always found their way home by supper time. School rang out at 3, but lessons kept on till dusk, shelling purple-hulled peas, helping Mrs. Tally hang quilts, memorizing scripture for Sunday recitation. Life moved slow enough you could hear the pecan trees complain like old knees when the wind shifted, slow enough that a promise of "I'll be there directly" meant you could count on a knock before the pie cooled. When Mama sent me for buttermilk at Mrs. Dodd's dairy, I'd hum Amazing Grace along the tracks, and every face I passed tipped a hat. That was the grease keeping small-town wheels from squealing. We didn't own much more than we could mend, yet the year felt rich. Revival tents glowing like lanterns, and autumn hog roasts where the whole county turned fence chatter into laughter. Harold ambled into that picture when I was 16, lanky as a maypole, hair slick with Brill cream, and a grin. His Chevrolet coughed to a stop outside Daddy's station, clutch slipping like a preacher's handshake, and while Daddy tinkered, Harold leaned against the soda cooler spinning tales of Memphis jukeboxes and a future where every living room might own a television set. I remember pressing a cold Nehi bottle, fizz popping like possibility. He talked of highways unwinding like ribbon and keeping a toolbox in the trunk so work could be chased wherever engine smoke pointed. I told him I aimed to teach Sunday school babies their first psalms and maybe stitch wedding gowns on the side. He chuckled kindly and said, "You'll do all that and more, Lou, the world's stretching wider every minute." How bright the horizon looked from a gas station parking lot. Shadows were already waiting. Daddy's heart would give out the winter before my vows. Mama's eyesight would blur, and Harold's boots would grow oily from the hours he gave those engines. But back then worries waited their turn. Even when polio crept through the county or Korea crackled across the zenith, I held tight to the notion that good hearts were armor enough. If you told that porch swing girl she'd one day call a lawyer to guard her from her own flesh and blood, she'd have stared like you'd switched the gospel. Betrayal, she thought, belonged to paperbacks, not backyards. Family was the one thing a thief couldn't pickpocket. Lord, wasn't that sweet naivete? Still, I cradle those memories gentle as robin eggs, because they show the world as it ought to be, slow, neighborly, stitched tight by porch lights. And whenever the present bangs its fists on my door, I breathe in the mix of gasoline and gardenia and remind myself that once I believed midnight troubles could be mended with daylight and a half pint of buttermilk. Funny how a Wednesday that began with plain coffee can reroute a lifetime before the pot even turns lukewarm. November was breathing frost on Benton's windows, and I was balanced on Harold's old aluminum ladder, determined to lash a strand of plastic angels across the eaves the way he used to, humming "O Little Town of Bethlehem" like the stubborn widow I'd become. One slick rung, a sharp gasp, and suddenly the sky spun cedar green, then cracked white when my hip met the porch rail. I remember thinking, as the ache bloomed, that the angels were dangling head down like startled bats. Daniel came an hour later, tires spitting gravel, panic painted on his face in strokes I hadn't seen since he was 11 and the coal stove belched smoke. He scooped me off the floorboards, scolded the ladder, and promised this would never happen again. Not on his watch. 2 days after the emergency room freed me with a bruise big as Arkansas, he returned with Tina, all sunshine hair, mint pink nails, and a smile that fit too easily, carrying banana bread, still warm enough to perfume the hallway. She wore soft sneakers so quiet they seemed respectful, called me Miss Lou, with a lilt that made the title sound like a hymn, and produced a clipboard tucked beneath that loaf as naturally as a nurse carries a thermometer. I'd never hired help, but Daniel's voice wobbled when he said, "Ma, just till you're steady," and Tina nodded like a daisy in a breeze, explaining how she'd refill prescriptions, sort mail, keep ladders off limits. There was a flutter inside, part embarrassment, part relief, yet peppered over it all was an odd, humming warmth. The way Tina poured my tea exactly 3 finger breadths from the rim, the way Daniel relaxed when she touched his sleeve. I couldn't name the feeling just then, only noticed my pulse stumble the tiniest bit, the same skip it did when Harold first winked across Daddy's gas pumps. Change was craning its neck through my screen door. That evening, while Tina rinsed dishes and Daniel fiddled with my thermostat like it was mission control, I caught my reflection in the window pane. Gray curls frizzed, cheeks mottled, eyes still bright but ringed with new worry, and a whisper bubbled up, "Lou, you've stepped onto a path you can't yet tread." Why did the thought matter? Because Benton's rhythm had always been simple. You fell, neighbors fetched casseroles, and life returned to its rightful porch swing pace. Yet here was an outsider stitching herself into our quilt, and my son, my once freckled boy, looked at her like dawn itself. I told myself it was gratitude, that Daniel finally had someone to lean on while leaning over me, but some tender, thrumming instinct older than marriage, older than motherhood, shivered and said, "Pay attention, Lou." I smiled anyway, thanked Tina for the bread, and let her erase Wednesday's tumble with prescriptions and fresh linens, unaware that the real fall had only just begun. For in that simple introduction lay a fuse, paperwork I would sign because Daniel's tone was soothing, nights Tina would lock the front door for my safety, and a quiet shift where their glances held more conversation than my ears were allowed. Looking back, I can trace every twist of betrayal to that banana-scented doorway moment. I didn't know why my heart knocked twice instead of once. But it was the first drumbeat of a storm that would test every lesson the porch swing girl ever believed about kindness circling home. December drifted in on a hush of frozen grass, and with it came the first hairline cracks in the life I'd kept neat as folded linens. Tina began arriving before dawn, her sneakers whispering across my hardwood like snowflakes, collecting my mail. To save you the walk, Miss Lou, stacking bills I never laid eyes on, and shepherding me from rocker to recliner as if my own house were a museum where I mustn't touch the exhibits. At first I chuckled, grateful for slippers delivered still warm from the dryer, but a twinge of embarrassment pricked whenever neighbors popped by with casseroles and Tina intercepted them at the screen door, saying I was resting when my hands fidgeted to shell peas or flip hymn book pages. The shift was so gentle it felt polite until the morning she guided me to the bathroom, closed the cabinet, and murmured, "Let's adjust these pills. The doctor updated your dosage." I hadn't seen a doctor since the bruises turned yellow. My pulse thumped with a worry I couldn't frame into words. I'd always prided myself on manners, and questioning a helper seemed rude, like spitting on kindness. Yet a hush of dread curled in my stomach, heavier each time Daniel stopped by only long enough to ask if Tina needed anything. He'd gone from son to supervisor, his conversations with me clipped, his laughter reserved for her. One icy Thursday, I shuffled to the mailbox early, breath puffing like cotton, and found it empty, but for a pink slip, insufficient funds. I blinked hard, sure it was the cold fogging my vision. When I asked Tina, she tilted her head, teeth gleaming, and patted my shoulder. "That's taken care of, sweetheart. Daniel consolidated accounts, so you don't have to fuss." My cheeks burned not from winter, but from the sharp sting of being handled. Still, fear knotted my tongue. What if I sounded ungrateful? Benton taught me never to bite the hand that serves, even if that hand rearranges your cupboards. Late nights, alone with the ticking mantel clock, I replayed Daddy's lessons on balancing ledgers, Mama's warnings about signing anything when grief fogged the brain, yet shame pressed heavier than their wisdom. How could I, a woman who once taught children the difference between trust and temptation, be doubting my own son? Meanwhile, whispers rolled through the Methodist quilting circle, Tina parking Daniel's truck behind the pharmacy at odd hours, Tina seen browsing jewelry counters 2 towns over. Gossip is thin ice, but it chilled me all the same. My only confident ear became Ruthin next door. She slipped me blueberry muffins and, with a brow furrowed deep as cotton rose, asked if I'd noticed my porch light camera blinking red instead of green. I told her I felt like a guest in my own story. She squeezed my hand and said, "Lou, even a guest can call out fire." That night I lay awake, pulse booming in my pillow, weighing 2 thorny roads, confront Daniel and risk him thinking age had soured my judgment, or stay silent and trust that love would course correct. Outside, wind rattled the angels still hooked to the eaves, their plastic wings clattering like warning bells. Pride and fear wrestled until dawn. Pride whispered I could manage this alone. Fear insisted I might be already caged without bars. And so the dilemma rooted itself. Was I protecting family by staying quiet or abandoning myself? My world had narrowed to a hallway of closed doors, each labeled for your own good, and the key lay somewhere between courage and catastrophe. The afternoon they tried to ship me off like a crate of chipped china began honey gold and harmless, sun spilling through lace curtains, kettle humming, yet by dusk that same light felt cruel, as if the Lord had tilted a lantern to expose every crack I'd been too polite to see. Tina breezed in first, perfume sharp as floor polish, carrying a fat manila folder and ushering a doctor whose stethoscope still smelled of somebody else's troubles. Daniel followed, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the linoleum like a guilty child set to task. "Ma," he said, voice thin, "we're gonna make things easier." Tina snapped the folder open. Bold letters shouted capacity evaluation. The doctor asked what season it was, who the president might be, whether I could recite the months backward. I answered every test with Sunday school diction, but his pen never paused, ink marching toward a verdict already chosen. Time thickened until even the wall clock seemed stunned, its second hand stuck between beats. Then Tina produced a plastic cup. "Just something to keep you calm, sweetheart." My palms went cold. That single word, sweetheart, sounded like a latch clicking. I slapped the cup away, pills skittering across the floor like moths. A hush swallowed the kitchen. I rose, hip throbbing, dignity burning, and felt something ancient in my spine straighten. "You may call it Sunset Pines," I said, voice low, but I hear cage. Daniel reached out, shame flooding his eyes, and whispered, "Ma, please, you don't understand." A laugh escaped, dry as corn husks. "Baby, I understand fine. I see ledgers where love ought to be." I blocked the hallway, dialed my niece Caroline in Dallas with fingers that shook yet aimed true. While the phone rang, I glared at the doctor, daring him to speak. Caroline answered brisk as autumn wind. I poured out names, dates, the folder title, everything. She told me to refuse every signature and ask them all, politely but firmly, to leave. I repeated her words like scripture. Tina's smile wilted. The doctor packed his clipboard, and Daniel looked suddenly smaller than the manila papers he'd trusted. When the front door closed behind them, my knees buckled and I slid against the stove, tears hot with grief and relief mingled. In that silence, I counted what had shattered. The boy who once filled my pockets with dandelions, the sweet myth that kindness alone can armor a woman. Yet I also felt a spark, steel settling where softness used to sit, anchoring me for the fight dawn would bring. While I waited for Caroline's headlights, I studied the fallen pills, tiny white moons against the linoleum, and felt the years of casserole deliveries, birthday carvings, midnight asthma vigils stacking inside me like bricks. Those memories rose into a wall no bulldozer of paperwork could flatten. I whispered to the empty room that I forgave the boy Daniel once was, but the man he'd become would have to earn his way back. And somewhere inside that hush I sensed Mama's voice, gentle but firm as quilt stitches. "Stand tall, Lou. Storms past the tree lean, but your gate's still yours." The clock resumed its ticking, the kettle sighed, and I sat straighter, ready at last to claim the ground between me and the cage they'd planned. Morning crept in like a shy kitten the day after that showdown, and the house, stripped of voices, felt bigger than the Lord's own sanctuary. Every tick of the clock rang clear enough to make a body flinch. Caroline had driven back to Dallas to draft filings, promising a judge would hear us before week's end. Yet in those gray hours it was only me and the ghosts of yesterday settling into the curtains. I hobbled from room to room taking stock, the recliner still tilted where the doctor perched, Tina's perfume lingering like spilled bleach, a half cup of tea gone cold beside the sink. Silence showed me fingerprints I'd missed, pills in the trash, receipts tucked under a phone book, the faint outline of Daniel's boots wearing a path between my desk and the front door. I collected them into a shoebox the way other women keep love letters, each scrap proof that faith can bruise. Noon found me seated at the kitchen table staring at my hands, noticing they trembled not from pain, but from the nakedness of having nobody to steady them. Pride said stand tall, but loneliness leaked through the floorboards just the same. It surprised me what I mourned, not the money, not even the near loss of my house, but the steady hum of trust I'd worn like an apron since childhood. Without it, the rooms felt drafty. The phone rang often, neighbors checking in, the preacher promising prayers, Ruth and reading grocery specials aloud so I'd feel normal, but when the receiver clicked back into place, the quiet returned, thick as gravy. I found myself whispering apologies to Harold's photograph for letting our boy wander so far into shadows, then scolding the frame for not warning me sooner. Nights stretched long as barbed wire. I'd sit on the edge of the bed listening to the porch camera blink, wondering how a lens could guard what a blood bond couldn't. Sleep came in puddles. Dreams carried me to revival tents where Daniel, age 10, waved a palm branch. I woke each time at the moment he vanished behind the choir. Dawn meant coffee turned bitter from reheating and letters to the bank written in the careful penmanship Mama taught. Each envelope I licked tasted of resolve, yet also of grief. My world had narrowed to legal pads and to-do lists, cancel power of attorney, change locks, install motion lights, memorize account numbers like scripture. Strength, I discovered, is a quiet chore, no audience, no trumpets, just the daily decision to keep breathing through the bruise. Still, I wasn't the same woman who'd climbed that ladder humming carols. Her faith in automatic goodness had cracked like old varnish. Instead, I carried a smaller, sterner hope that people may fail you, but vigilance can still set a table where peace will sit a spell. On the fourth evening, the mailbox offered my first victory, a certified notice freezing the contested accounts. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried, not from fear this time, but from the relief of feeling the ground hold steady beneath my slippers. That night, as wind rocked the porch swing, I whispered into the darkness a new promise, that the cage door would stay forever off its hinges, even if it meant standing sentinel alone. Faith hadn't left me. It had simply traded its lace gloves for work gloves, and in that trade I felt, for the first time since Daniel's tires kicked gravel, something like steadied breathing return. And solitude, like winter soil, hid seeds I hadn't imagined would ever sprout come spring. Something as simple as an unexpected sunrise can shift an old heart's pieces back into place. It was early March when I climbed onto that same porch swing, new padlocks glinting on the gate, and noticed a scrappy dandelion pushing through a crack in the concrete, defiant as any preacher's promise. I cupped it in my palm, remembering how Mama once pressed wildflowers between hymn books to hold beauty in hard times. In that moment, something in me stirred, a gentle insistence that life, even cracked and bruised, still finds a way to blossom. Not long after, I took Ruth up on her offer and volunteered to teach Sunday school again, just 2 hours each Wednesday night. Walking into the church annex felt like greeting an old friend. The polished pews, the scent of beeswax candles, the chorus of children greeting me with shy smiles. I stood before a dozen little ones, their eyes wide as saucers, and for the first time in months, my voice didn't tremble. I told them a story about mustard seeds and miracles, and as I spoke, I could feel belief knitting itself back into my chest. Outside of church, my niece Caroline called with news. The court had ruled in my favor, restoring control of my accounts and ordering an investigation into Tina's past dealings. Relief bloomed so warm it nearly hurt, but I swallowed a sigh of gratitude and gave thanks in silence, knowing victory can carry its own kind of weight. Motivated by that ruling, I began writing letters, handwritten, heartfelt, to other women in the assisted living network, warning them of slick promises and sneaky signatures. I posted them on community boards at the pharmacy, at the senior center, even slipped a few into the church newsletter. One afternoon, The postmistress handed me a stack of returned cards, each scribbled with thanks. "Your words saved me. I think she was after my house, too. Bless you for speaking up." My heart swelled with cautious excitement. I wasn't just surviving. I was helping others stand guard over their own stories. And so, that dandelion in my hand became my talisman. I planted it in a pot on my windowsill, watching it unfurl golden petals as the days lengthened. It reminded me that courage doesn't roar. It pushes up quietly beneath weighty stones, determined to meet the sun. Daniel never came back home, and some days that fact settled like ash in my lungs. But each Wednesday, when I gathered those children around, I felt a spark of purpose warmer than any sun's embrace. Even in solitude, I discovered we can offer shelter to one another. Benton streets carried on their familiar routines, yet I walked them differently now, eyes open, stride measured, heart light enough to share its thump with anyone who needed to hear it. This second chance wasn't a grand chapter. It was a handful of small decisions, teaching, writing, planting, speaking, that stitched a new pattern in my life's quilt. And if that patchwork has a seam, it's right here. Hope grows best in soil turned over by hardship, fed by hands brave enough to plant again. I sat on the edge of the porch late that afternoon, the sun slanting through bare oak branches and dust motes dancing like tiny prayers, feeling the weight of the last few months settle into my bones. For weeks I'd carried anger in my throat like a bad cough, bitterness in my palm like a loaded thimble, but now I realized that those heavy poisons were only chains I'd wrapped around my own wrists. I thought of the folder of papers Tina left behind, the glossy sheen of her banana bread lies, the moment Daniel's eyes flickered with guilt and fear as I called my niece. I pictured that folder tucked away in my desk drawer, unopened since the lawyer's office, its pages mocking me with every shuffle of paper. And so I rose, each step creaking like an old hymn, and went inside to find it. My hands trembled not with fear, but with purpose as I lifted the manila cover, allowing the corners of its flaps to curl against my resolve. I remembered Mama's words about letting go of things that no longer serve, how she'd torn old photographs into river pieces so the memories could flow on without dragging her heart downstream. With a deep breath that rattled my ribs, I laid the folder out by the window where sunlight would bleach its lies away, and I tore it open, page by page, letting each sheet drop into my lap like fallen leaves. Paper fragments drifted to the floor as if bowing out of respect, and in their place I felt a space opening, fresh as spring soil. I gathered the bits and carried them outside, tossing them into the garden where the earth could compost both ink and intention, transforming betrayal into fertile promise. The breeze snatched at the scraps, carrying them toward the budding daffodils, and I watched until every trace had floated beyond sight. In that simple act, tearing and releasing, I told myself that yesterday's storms would not drown tomorrow's sunrise. I stood barefoot on the dewy grass, feeling each blade press against my soles, grounding me in the world that had weathered worse. My heart pulsed with a new rhythm, steady and gentle, like the hum of bees returning to early blossoms. I thought of forgiveness as a gift I gave myself, not a pardon for Daniel or Tina, but a coronation of my own worth beyond their debts. I whispered into the cool air, I choose to live beyond regret, to rise above sorrow, to walk forward with open hands and an open heart. And as those words settled between heaven and ground, I felt a shift deep inside, a quiet relief that washed through me like warm water through thirsty roots. From that moment on, I decided that my story would be one of purpose rather than pain. I would write letters, plant gardens, teach lessons, and remind anyone who would listen that strength can blossom in soil turned over by loss. I cast aside the last shadows of doubt and stepped back onto the porch, breathing in freedom's soft exhale. In choosing to let go, I claimed the rest of my days not as victim, but as witness to my own courage, and with that, I found the truest definition of home. Funny how the years teach you what no Sunday school ever could. Vigilance is an act of love, and freedom is a daily practice, not a given right. I have come to understand that kindness wears many masks, and sometimes the softest voice hides the sharpest blades. When I first trusted the promise of honeyed words, I forgot that honey can catch flies as well as soothe wounds. Now I see that love without discernment can become the very cage one hoped to escape. The real lesson, sugar, isn't to turn my heart to stone, but to season it with caution, allowing tenderness and skepticism to dance together rather than spar apart. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls built to shut people out, but fences set to protect the flowers in your own garden. In sharing my story with the women who hold tear-stained letters and fear-dried voices, I remind them and myself that courage often looks like ordinary days lived with eyes wide open. Perhaps the truest truth I've gleaned is that waiting for rescue is a gamble on someone else's clock. The bravest act is to become your own first responder. I used to believe that silence honored grace, but now I know that silence can also feed the shadows where wrongdoers roam. Speaking out, though trembling on the tongue, became the hammer that cracked the glass of deceit. Strength isn't always the thunder you hear. Sometimes it's the quiet shove that sets the world spinning back into light. I'm reminded that forgiveness, while freeing, skips no accountability. It's a bridge built on sturdy beams of honesty. And yes, heartbreak can be the furnace that tempers the soul, forging a steel you never knew you possessed. We all deserve to walk through our front doors without fear, to pour tea without minding who sips last, to lay our heads down at night knowing we've kept our own watch. If my journey offers one thing to you, dear listener, let it be this. Relinquish the fiction that age or circumstance excuses you from guarding your own story. Step into your truth without apology, knowing that even a single seed of resolve can bloom into a forest of freedom. Because waiting for someone else to unlock your cage is a prayer that may echo unheard. The key, friends, resides in the very hand you've been afraid to open. And so, as I sit here with a garden blooming at my feet, I carry not the bitterness of what I lost, but the wisdom of what I refuse to surrender, my right to guard my days and shape my own tale. Perhaps, and only perhaps, it's time for you to stop waiting, too, and start living the chapters you deserve. Sweetheart, here we are at the porch steps once again, you and me, leaning into the golden light of now rather than the shadows of then, and I can't help but feel a soft flutter in my chest knowing we've shared this long ride together. I want you to cradle the warmth of today in your palms the way I cradle my teacup, steady, certain, and ever gentle, because this tale isn't locked behind glass in some dusty history. It breathes in the present air, dancing with every choice we make now. I hope you feel the quiet echo of my laughter as I rocked on this very swing, the hush of my tears when I tore those papers, and the steady hum of my heartbeat as I planted that stubborn dandelion. Because it was in those moments I rediscovered what it means to be fully alive. When you close your eyes tonight, imagine that breeze brushing past oak leaves just beyond my gate, carrying the scent of gardenias and possibility, and know that even a life marked by betrayal can be rewritten with strokes of courage. I want you to sense the hand I've extended across time, offering you the compass I fashioned from broken trust and gentle wisdom, which says, tend your own ground, speak your own truth, and let no one cage the wildness of your spirit. There's something tender in knowing that the trials which once cracked my heart open have also let in the light, and if you listen closely, you might hear the soft click of a lock turning free. And now, dear friend, I'd like to leave you with a question that has lingered in my mind as I watch sunbeams dance on these weathered boards. Do you believe that true love, the kind that roots so deep it risks the bone, ought always to find its way back home? Is the promise of return part of love's very definition, or does love become its truest self when it learns to bloom in new soil? I'll admit, some nights I lie awake imagining Daniel standing just beyond the gate, wondering if the son I raised still remembers the rhythm of our Sunday hymns and the way my voice cracked when I taught them. And sometimes I think maybe he still remembers. Maybe that memory shines bright enough to guide him heart first through any dark that lies ahead. But more than anything, I want you to carry this spark I've handed you, so that whatever storm you weather, you'll find your own way back to the porch of your own becoming. After all, a life well loved is never truly finished. It holds its last word in the questions we leave hanging in the air, waiting for brave hearts to answer them. So tell me, sugar, what will your answer be? Should true love always return?